which this is another thing you'll hear, is called DP. And no, it does not stand for double penetration. Okay, let's talk about how to enjoy fighting games and like understand fighting games from just a like beginner level, just to understand what is going on the screen, okay? If you guys are watching this on YouTube, I appreciate you guys, but here we go. So I think when people look at fighting games, like I think they can get overwhelmed at like all the things that are happening on the screen. It's sort of a weird thing because there's plenty of games that are popular esport wise that I think are just as unintelligible as fighting games. Like look at League of Legends, look at Dota, look at, I don't know, even like Valorant, right? Like I think these are all games that you kind of have to like understand. I think Valorant has it easier because everyone understands like headshots and shooty things. So yeah, let's talk about it. So obviously the goal in every fighting game is to deplete your HP at the top. That's everyone's thing, right? And then normally most fighting games have some kind of meter at the bottom that tells you, hey, this is like how much energy I've charged. Think of it as like a battery, right? And when you're at full meter, like I am here, I can use really special moves like this. But they only exist when you have full meter. So when you look at the bottom, you can kind of see like what resources people have. Think about it this way: if you're coming from League, maybe the bottom meter kind of tells you what is available to them. It's kind of like if your ulti was on cooldown, right? Like if you don't have any meter, you don't have enough to do your ulti. That's like a really basic way to think about it. But in this game and in some other games, you can use that battery for different effects. So like in this game, I can use it for something called Roman canceling, which lets me like freeze time, and there's a bunch of applications for it in this game. Generally, even though people say that fighting games feel like you can kind of like do whatever, right? Like if you casually played fighting games, just like you can press buttons and things will happen. But in actuality, fighting games are a turn-based game, meaning that it's always one person's turn. Usually the person whose turn it is the one who's attacking. The person who's not attacking is usually blocking. And that looks something like this, right? Like, it's my turn, so I'm just like going to town, pressing buttons against the enemy, right? And generally, this state, the attacker is trying to use what they call mix-ups to try to open up the opponent and actually start getting hits in. Because like obviously, they're guarding. I'm not gonna do any damage here, right? So they're trying to look for opportunities to escape this, and the attacker is figuring out ways to get the hit, right? And then that's when you see a big combo usually, and that's how that works. Does that make sense? So I think the simplest things to think about in fighting games is like who's blocking, who's attacking, and then when they get hit, what's happening, right? Because generally, you don't want to be sole bad guy here and take a bunch of hits. That's bad. That's a bad thing. The other thing to know in fighting games is that there's a stage, and the stage is big, and your stage positioning will change how you think about the game. Think of it as like, I keep using League, but it's basically how much control you have over the stage anytime. So like you can see my button here, and it controls like, I control the space around me and not much more, right? There are characters who control much larger spaces of this stage. So you're trying to intricately understand what spaces people control. So notice here, her buttons are really big. Like I can hit this guy from like really far away. And so she controls something different. But generally the trade-off is for people who have big buttons is that they're slow, right? And when you have a slow button, that means that if the person who's defending can read it, they might be able to get punished. So it's that's kind of the usual like trade-off. So based off your character, there's always going to be a tension. It's kind of like I keep using League of Legends because I feel like most of the people who've watched me before understand League of Legends. And so kind of like League of Legends, based off of what your character does and what their character does, you know, they're gonna have different game plans, right? So like Xell is what you would call like a keep away character. His whole plan is to never let you get near him. And so he's just gonna keep poking you like this and making sure that you can never get in. Oh. I'm literally on the other side of the screen. Like literally, it's as far. I feel like poke is pretty pretty self-explanatory, Iris, but I can explain anyway. But like, pokes are essentially, you're not trying to convert a combo, you're just there to try to dissuade them from ever getting in. That's what a poke is. Depending on the game plan, people are gonna have different ways of playing the game. So like I said, Axel's trying to keep you out. You have characters like Soul Bad Guy, who's kind of an all-arounder. And he's not super far distance the way Axel is. He's not like ultra mix-up heavy the way like Milia is. And so like you'll notice that he has big buttons. Like these things hit from really far away. But they're not ridiculous the way like Ram or Axel. And so his game plan is to get in and start dealing lots of damage to you. And usually all-around characters like this have some kind of projectile to like help them get their way in. So like with Axel, basically everything he throws out is a projectile. And in Soul Bad Guy's case, he's got to, you know, control space and then start getting in, right? I hesitate to use this. They call characters like Soul a Shoto, which usually means you have some kind of projectile move and then you have some kind of uppercut. Every character in this game has a regular throw. This is a regular throw, right? It's hard to tell because of his animation, but every character in the game has some way of throwing another character. However, some characters have what's called a command grab, which means they have a separate grab that they can use. Now, the reason why this distinction is important is because a normal grab can be what's called teched. And basically, a tech is the opponent, if the defender also presses grab at the same time, theoretically, that's what's supposed to happen. It's really hard in this game. So you get that animation, and that means that your grab gets negated, right? And that's the con of a normal grab, is that your opponent can actually do something to prevent it from actually going through. But a command normal, you don't have that. So that's a big distinction. The term command just means that there's like a specific set of buttons that does the so that's what a command grab is. But yeah, I feel like that's like the main stuff, honestly. It's just like understanding what options each characters have. I can go a little bit into it too. There's no way to counter a command grab. Usually though, command grabs are slow and you can hit them out of it and you can jump out of it. That's what a command grab is. So we talked about blocking, right? In blocking, one person is just holding back. However, there are moves that like put you in so much stun that you are not allowed to try to like mash your way out of it. So like on defense, like I have the bot right now set to mash grab. You can do that, right? But it's super unsafe. And basically unsafe means that you can get hit out of it. So if I set her to try to like counterattack me, basically she will not be able to. See how I will always get the I will always go first, essentially. What's supposed to happen is I hit her right after because she's trying to grab. And the reason why that happens is because she's what's called minus. And being minus means you are not allowed to touch a button or you will get hit. Does that make sense? And the reason why they call that is due to frame advantage. And basically frames, right, are just the amount of frames animation-wise that things are active and are in play, essentially. The block stun from Soul's this button is so long that the other person can't do anything to attack right after it, essentially. And that's why 100% of the time, she will get hit if I'm doing this. And it'll always be a counter hit. That's what it means to be plus. Now, if you're minus, you're gonna get hit. So moves that you do against an opponent are always gonna be plus, minus, or sometimes neutral. And as the attacker, you get to try to mix things in to try to figure out how you can poke through your opponent's defensive habits. And so I have this bot to jab all the time, right? So like you can do what's called stagger, which means you don't do things as fast. So I can do things as fast as possible, and they will never have a chance to punch until after all the blocks. However, I can slow it down to bait them into pressing a button, and I'll get a counter hit. And so it becomes this like really cool rock, paper, scissors. Why would I ever use a neutral or minus move? Because sometimes you need to mix them up. Not every character has plus moves, right? Like my character, Milia, who's on the right, she doesn't really have traditional like plus moves. So it's like a tool that some characters have, as being plus. And it makes their offense very, very scary. Knowing every character's moves and knowing if they're plus or not is really important. Super, super important. You want to know, like, again, which spaces people have that they can threaten at any time. And then when you're blocking them, you have to know when it's your turn, right? Because if you don't, you're going to explode. Because you're going to get counter hit. So knowing that stuff is really important, and like every high-level player will have an understanding of like what is plus, what is minus, what is neutral. When you hear those terms like plus, minus, that's what they mean. Okay, let's talk about probably one of the other really important states of the game, which is what people call Oki. I had no idea what the heck Oki meant for the longest time, and I had to look it up. And then when I looked up Oki Zeme, it still wasn't. I still didn't understand what that meant. So let me explain what Oki and knockdown is. So a knockdown is a move that makes you sit on the ground, right? See how Milia has to go through a whole set of animations to get back up on her feet? That's the wake up animation. It's an animation that you never want to see yourself in, because the opponent can start setting stuff up, right? So if you're on the ground, the opponent gets to do stuff before you even get to do anything. And that's why it's such a scary idea to be in a knockdown. Now, certain characters are better at doing stuff from knockdown, and the character I play is really good at it. She can set up what's called her H disc, which is what's known as like a meaty. And a meaty, well, technically, I'm gonna ignore that, but basically a meaty is a move that on their wake up, they're forced to block it. Because like the move is out over them, essentially, as they're trying to get up. And yeah, so what Oki is, the Oki is the art of finding like a set play that you can do around people's wake-ups, right? So Oki is really easy to explain with Milia because of her H disc. So I set the H disc down, right? And it's going to hit them. And so I have a lot of options. I can grab them because they're going to try to block it. I can go to the other side and do what's called a cross-up, which is like they expect me to hit them from their left, but instead I hit them from their right. And that usually mixes up your blocking, because when you're blocking, you can see my joystick in the bottom left. It's like if I'm holding left, I'm not going to be able to block on the other side of me. So that's the type of mix-up called the cross-up. There's a lot of lingo, but it's more like the concepts that are important. Like you don't need to know like all these things, like Oki, knockdown. You don't have to be a super nerd to like understand this stuff. Some characters also have invincible moves, which this is another thing you'll hear, is called DP. And no, it does not stand for double penetration. DP is called Dragon Punch from Street Fighter, and they just colloquially call that what it is. Yeah, it's not what you think it is, okay? I promise. And basically, because it starts in invincible, I actually can't even do Oki against this, kind of, because it's invincible. I can't do anything about this. See how like my leg literally went through him? Like he's just invincible. Well, I'm not gonna get into the specifics. let's not get too far. And so characters with what's called a DP are really annoying in knockdown situations because normally knockdown, like when you're getting up from knockdown, you're helpless. You can't do anything. However, characters with DPs actually do have something. Now, another thing that characters can do is just a super. The supers are also invincible when they first start up. So that's another way. God, that does so much damage. Wait, look at how much damage this does if it counter hits me. Oh! That's like 60-70% of my HP if I mess that up. Okay. So yeah, like so yeah, sometimes it's really scary. And it's really scary on Wake Up when they have meter. You don't want to get pulverized. See, I can do my invincible attack and then beat his. So how do you deal with an invincible move? So now what's good about invincible moves and what's bad about them is that if they're going to do an invincible move, you can hit them after. So every invincible move in the game has what's called a lot of recovery. Am I not blocking? What the heck? So I just block, right? And now I just get to go off on. Invincible moves, they're really good because they're invincible right away. But if the person blocks it, you're helpless too. Boom. And in this game, I get a counter hit, which means I get a fat punch for it. So that's how you deal with an invincible move. So it becomes like a game of rock, paper, scissors, right? Like, am I going to attack? Or am I going to block and punish the thing? So yeah, you can just block them, but it's counterintuitive, right? Because when you're the aggressor and you get a knockdown, you want to be able to get a meaty and start your turn again. However, DPs are like, no, we ain't gonna let you do that, right? So this gives you like another set of like levels to think about when knockdown situations happen. I understand this a lot. This is not like, these concepts are not things that like everyone's gonna understand right away. But essentially though, things are always gonna be on the level of whose turn is it. I always think, when I'm thinking about fighting games and watching them, I'm always thinking whose turn, who gets to attack. And when you try to take your turn on an improper thing, right? Like let's say I'm minus, like I am here, like I just get hit. And that means that I get hit and my turn is over. So sometimes it's bad. And you can't steal turns. You have to let your turns play out. So how do I know whose turn it is? So from a viewer's perspective, it's pretty easy because usually the person who's getting hit is their turn. And the turn changes based off of what we talked about before with like, let's say it's my turn and I get to attack Soul Bad Guy, right? So currently it's my turn because I get to hit him. However, if I do my attacks on him improperly and I get hit for it, then now it's his turn. So it switches turn essentially based off of who is in the commanding position, and the commanding position is usually the guy who's attacking. Because sometimes it's nobody's turn, and that's something that's kind of weird, right? In fighting games, you've got what's called neutral, which is basically nobody's hitting each other directly, and they're jockeying for space, and they're trying to find the way in. So that's like the big thing that players are going to do, is they're going to like jockey for space, try to threaten with some hitboxes, and they're going to try to figure out a way to get into their opponent. And that's what we call neutral. And it's probably one of the most advanced things in the game, but really it just comes down to how good are you at getting your opponent to either block or get hit. That's what neutral is. And with that, that's kind of like every circumstance in the game. So it's posturing and mind games, yeah, exactly. Because like, neutral is like the part of the game that's the most, like, everyone's got options, right? Because, like, no one's hitting each other, no one's preventing each other from doing things necessarily. And so it's about you using your toolkit to figure out how to approach your opponent. And so people are going to mind game each other. They're going to, like, figure out their opponent's habits, you know? Exactly, positioning in League. You know how, like, you know in League, when you're going for a CS, it's like your opponent will try to punish you for that? That's basically the neutral game in fighting games. Actually, when I think about playing laning in League, I think of fighting games because they're the exact same concept. It's like both of you guys are trying to jockey for that space, for that hit, and you're using your toolkit to see if you can get that damage in. And it's basically the hardest thing. Yeah, exactly. It's the hardest thing to master in fighting games. So boom, that's like a quick 101 on things. So if people have questions, let me know. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, again, thank you so much for watching, and like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff.